Where do we begin today?
It's a really good question. Um, Sometimes when having these kinds of interviews, I have specific questions. Um, these days, it's feeling more and more like rather than ask questions, whenever I have a question, just go into practice and let it resolve itself.
Hmm.
Um, that said, it's I still have this sense that guidance can be useful, but I'm not sure how to direct the questioning or the
Hmm.
guidance.
Yeah, for many questions, I think that can be a good approach to just let the mind deal with it by itself and let it come up or not, and then maybe the question just dissipates as well. So yeah, I think that's a good valid approach for many spiritual questions to just go into practice. But where I think guidance is necessary, even, is in the process of making that practice go in the right direction.
Mm,
So
okay.
it's less about um, what is my experience about, what does this mean to me or my life, what is this experience telling me about reality. It's less about those questions and more about how do I deal with that, or how do I approach this? Where do I go from here? So yeah,
Right.
it's more about practice and direction.
Yeah. So in my practice, normally what I do is sit, let the mind settle, and then there's an instinctive process which searches for places that I'm holding on. I say I'm holding on, but even holding on to I. Um, and there have been insights in the past about holding on to duality, holding on to identity, holding on to the illusion of time. So it's possible that there's some area where the holding is not being noticed. And this is my conception of practice, right? Is that when people start their spiritual practice, they might try to follow an instruction that says just sit and do nothing, but they don't notice that they're actually not doing nothing. They're holding on to lots of things.
Hmm.
And through insight, it can become clear that, oh, these are not these are not nothing. These are holdings.
Hmm.
And where pointing out instructions, like in the Dzogchen tradition, I assume you're somewhat familiar with it.
Hmm.
Yeah, they often do these, pointing out instructions. The purpose of which, as far as I can tell, is to point the practitioner to where they're maybe holding and releasing it. And so it's possible there are places that I'm holding that I'm just not noticing,
Hmm.
and that might be a useful. I don't know how to find those places because the whole point is that they're blind spots.
Hmm.
But it also makes it hard to ask questions.
Mm. Yeah, your description of holding views is quite correct. I would say it's even a little bit stronger. Like when people go into meditation and try to do nothing, it's not just that you hold something, which some is also a little bit passive. It's more you are actively creating certain
Mm,
views. It's like
mm-hmm.
you create every moment, even though there is no verbal thought, there might be the creation of um, the sense of I, even though you're not thinking
Yeah,
I. It's just a certain perspective onto what you're experiencing that is created.
yeah, yeah.
for people who don't know, it seems like that's the way reality is
Right.
and that's
Yeah.
normal and it's not created, but it's actually created. And
Right.
um, it could be helpful to play around when you become aware that you are creating it, to create it differently on purpose, like create
Mm-hmm.
the opposite, like try to see your experience as it happens,
Mm.
as if there it would run on a screen and there would be nobody watching it,
Right.
kind of.
Yeah.
No, it's not happening for you, like trying to switch into that perspective. That can help soften the creation.
Yeah, that's true. And it feels like instinctually that does happen for me during a session. Like I can sense right now, for example, especially because we're talking, um, and it feels like presently the only way I can have a conversation is by imputing, a self over here and somebody over there and some kind of separation. It feels that way. I know it's not true, but my practice isn't at a point where no self is clear in relationship with others.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, like I can sense it's a bit difficult to play around with that and have the conversation continue, but that's happening right now. There's an attempt to play with the view there.
Mm-hmm.
In my regular sits, there's like I'm trying to do it now. That's why I'm looking away from you, looking
Mm.
up here. Um, yeah, one of the maybe sticking points we can say is I expect it to feel like something specific, concrete, when, say, the view of duality falls away.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I mean, the attempt to look for a change in how things look itself creates a duality. So I can
Mm-hmm.
tell that looking for the change is not the way to go about it. But then there's also not a trust that duality has actually been dropped.
Mm-hmm.
So my only approach right now is to just, okay, remain in that space where there's looking and there's this visual experience, and where is that happening? How could it be at any distance? Distance from what? And in that, there's no sense of it happening anywhere, and yet there isn't a feeling of completion, like, ah,
Mm-hmm.
right, this is enlightenment.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking for a sense that, like, holy shit, that's it. I don't know if that comes. Maybe it will after a while. That used to bother me a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
but I noticed that that bothering was itself just an active process that wasn't helping anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is a beauty to this uh, Zen instruction to just sit, because what it does is it reduces the chance of what you just described happening, of you looking for something actively,
Right,
like you
right,
introducing another view, another goal, because actually, from a certain viewpoint, interpreted with a certain model, you can say you are actually already experiencing many non-dual moments, just that when they happen, they are not recognized, and so another moment follows where there becomes you create a sense of I that then interprets, yeah, of course, I'm here and I'm always here.
right,
And I have been there the last moment when actually you wasn't there, but
right.
that's
Yeah,
kind of overlooked. And
Yeah,
so with the just sitting or with like not looking for something else is to just drop this idea of, I have to introduce a self here and
right.
just
Yeah.
let more room and awareness come up for these like raw experiences to show themselves without like too much
Yeah.
interpretation.
Yeah. So it used to be before retreat. I did 2 retreats in the past few weeks, right? Before retreat, there was much more hang up about, oh, have I gotten it? Oh, have I not gotten it? Now there's much less of that going on, which is
Yeah.
clearly a step in the right direction. And so that's why I said I don't know if I've got a specific question or if guidance is really necessary at this point. But if I had to like force myself to ask something, because here I am on chat with you now, might as well say something, right? If I had to dig for something, I would say that something is that following practice, there's no sense that, like during that session, even in retrospect, I saw the thing that is supposed to be seen. Not that there is something that's supposed to be seen, but it's like for example, from for you, there is a clear sense of resolution.
Mhm.
And presumably before there was a sense of permanent resolution, there were sits where following it, there was a sense that that was it.
Mhm.
So there haven't really been sits where at the end I'm like, that was it. I don't perceive that as a problem. I trust that that'll resolve itself. But if I had to make a problem, that would be the problem.
Mhm. Yeah, the funny thing is this feeling of or this idea that is it that comes more as a way of seeing that it's always been that way. And that is,
Mm,
I mean, you have heard that probably many times before, but it's so surprisingly that it it's so sneaky because it's not this big fireworks moment where it's like, okay, there is something definitely completely different from before where it's easy to recognize. It's more, it grows on you, the sense like, oh my God, this is really it, and it hasn't really changed. There still comes thoughts that are self-related. There's still thoughts coming of um, I versus the world, but like from a perspective where you can see like that's all created as a one arising, and
yeah,
so yeah, it doesn't really change the content, and maybe not also not immediately how you relate to things. Surely over time it changes, in my experience, how you act and how you interact with the world, but not like immediately. And that's why it's so, on the one hand, easy to overlook, but then
right.
over time also very clear that yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I recognize what you're saying actually. Um, and there's also this sense like, Angelo DeLulo.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've been following his work for a while, and in one of his podcasts, he talks to somebody, Josh Putnam, where they describe in one of Josh's sits, he describes, this is just a conceptualization or a visualization, but the and I'll use my words for it, the paradox at the heart of reality, the
Hmm.
void, completely void of anything, so it's not even an it, but the primordial paradox, which then bursts into apparent being,
Hmm.
into the whole multiverse, right, at all times. And that's all that's really ever going on. And I know this clearly. I've seen it very clearly. And if I attune toward it now, I can taste it. And I don't think that would be possible unless there were some degree of realization.
Hmm.
And I don't hear many people talking about it, frankly. Many even realized teachers. I've never heard Daniel Ingram talk about it, or, really anyone. So this gives some confidence that, like, I mean, it feels like I can just incline toward that and it takes care of itself because how could it go any deeper than that?
Ah, okay. I so I'm not quite sure I got what you mean there. Um, so you say for you it's as easy as like switching into that perspective or into that deeper knowing of this
Because
oneness of everything, and then that's like um that's already the complete picture for you, and or how do I have to understand this, and why you say like nobody put it that way before.
yeah, so okay, so in the story of Aditya, there's been this process of like finding a teacher who, okay, you start the spiritual process and you're confused because everything sounds the same and there's a million different spiritual teachers and they all have different teachings and
Mm-hmm.
which one's the right one? Um, and maybe at some point on the path, you're kind of inclined towards some teaching, but you're not completely confident. Like there's no sense of, okay, the validation has to come from inside.
Mm-hmm.
And when it does, I mean, there are various validations where it's like, yeah, okay, I see it. But as far as I can tell, there's exactly one validation where it's like, oh, that's just.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And having seen it, like I can tell I've seen it very clearly. I can't point out when because first of all, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think when is even a meaningful thing here. If I had to put it in autobiographical terms, I
Mm-hmm.
saw it at various times in childhood. I've seen it on deep psychedelic trips. And in the moment of seeing it in those times, it becomes abundantly clear, like you said, that it
Yeah.
never, yeah, there's no time that you saw it.
Yeah.
There's no times that you see it like, but for whatever reason, it left a memory imprint
Mm-hmm.
such that if I tune into that right now,
Mm.
I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Now, when I see it, so I'm trying to do this right now while talking to you. When I see it, there is a complete and unshakable confidence that that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, because I'm talking to you and I feel like I have to produce a question, I'm going to let my questioning mind come in right now. And that questioning mind notices, hmm, if it were really true that you're in contact with, I won't even call it the ground of being because it's beyond being and non-being, right? Contact with the truth. Why does it still, if I turn my attention this way, why does it still feel like I'm over here and Lawrence is over there?
Ah, yeah, yeah, okay.
Because there is still a sense that the visual field is somewhere out there. If I don't know how to say this. I mean, if I'm tuned toward the primordial paradox,
Mm-hmm.
then there's no question of where the visual field is.
Mm.
But also, there's no sense that it's right here.
Yeah. Okay, I get what you mean. Um, for me, this has resolved by just accepting that this idea or this interpretation of world and self or other and self, that is just a function of all of this interpretation as a human being. Like, why do you have to eat? Like you could say, like this groundless being, non-being, why does it have to eat? You're still
Sure.
probably
Yeah.
going
Right.
to eat
Yeah.
anyways
Yeah.
or breathe. And that's the same, like, yeah,
Let me
this self sense is still like just how it produces the human being.
let me reframe the question. So if I watch a spiritual teacher, I mean, you or Angelo or somebody who's attained completion, they still eat. They still admit that they have to eat. But one thing that differs is they say, there's complete confidence that this is it. And even
Yeah.
before they've reached, the end, right? So the way Angelo breaks it up into stages, and I don't know if this matches any of your models, but there's a first awakening where you realize yourself to be pure, unbound being, the space in which everything occurs. And the second awakening is non-duality, in which self and where the contents of awareness are inseparable from awareness. but there still feels to be something called awareness, which is either the space in which things happen or the principle that manifests things. And then in
Hmm.
stage three, that landing place called awareness dissolves and everything
Hmm.
is happening by itself to itself.
Yeah.
And at this, let's say, second stage, where the self isn't completely gone, but there's this feeling of, I'm pure awareness, Brahman. People who go through that often get on YouTube and talk about how it was a huge paradigm shift. And even before it was a permanent shift, they had sits where it was like, whoa, I melted into the fabric of reality.
Hmm.
They still eat. That's not different from me. But they do say that they had this profound experience that made certain things clear. That has not happened to me.
Ah, okay. Okay, I see. Yeah. Yeah, so in that sense, in that case, yes, there's clearly more practice that's going to help you reach that transition in perception. So that's still like the right intuition that you have there. But what I meant before, what doesn't change is the ability to interpret reality
Sure, right,
in the
yes,
same way that you do
right,
as a self. Like I can talk to you and know that if I have to answer you, I have
yes,
to speak with this side
right, yes, yes.
of the play. And so that doesn't go away.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
And it still happens. Like I don't have to consciously think about it. It happens like
right,
rather automatically.
right,
It's like before. You don't have to like, okay, how do I go about creating this self now? Because it's not automatic.
yes,
No, it's
right,
still happens, but it all is perceived very differently.
sure, yeah,
So, and in that, yeah, in that sense, from my perspective, I would say there's just more dissolving that needs to be done, or that
yeah,
will happen, like through practice mostly.
yeah, and I guess the only question is then during. I mean, the problem, of course, unfortunately, you can't, enter my perspective with me,
Yeah.
because that would be, kind of the perfect way for you to point out, oh, there's, some creation going on over here. Um, so in lieu of that, it feels like my only option is to just continue sitting,
Hmm.
um, and let the perceptual artifacts resolve.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And one shift that really made a difference for me is in one of my retreats, I reached a point where I clearly saw that it doesn't matter whether I reach this sooner or later. Somehow it
mm,
was deeply clear that this drive, like I need to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible and with deep necessity, that fell away. And paradoxically, it sped up the process.
right, yeah,
And
that
I
one,
know it's easier said than done, but bringing into practice a sense of um, okay, this is already complete, like completion in the moment. Like, okay, let me just practice well, but like not for any other moment in time.
right, right, yeah, that one is interesting because what ends up happening often is the mind gets a hold of that and turns it into treating practice as casual.
Hmm.
Like there's this, fine line there, or
Mm.
interesting paradox, right? Because on the other hand,
Yeah.
in a certain sense, it matters tremendously
Yeah.
because there are an infinite number of sentient beings who are apparently suffering, and it would be crazy to put off. So I tend to word the complacency side,
Mm.
and I
Yeah.
counteract that by,
Whatever idea keeps the motivation alive for you, that's certainly good to keep. Like, but don't let it flash up during meditation too often. Like when you know, okay, I don't have motivation today for my sit, then like bring up that idea that motivates you to sit, but like don't constantly look for it, like in your
Mm.
meditation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
It's
usually if I'm sitting for a long, let's say an hour, then that motivation fades within, if it fades within 5 or 10 minutes, I have to refresh it. Otherwise, the rest of the sit just becomes
hmm
bleh.
hmm yeah, yeah, that's certainly a um, valid way to practice bringing up that motivation or really strengthening it in the beginning,
Hmm.
becoming clear of your intentions for the sit and why you are doing that, like to really bring bring the energy to the sit that urgency creates, but not the urgency itself, if you know what I mean. And you want the
Right.
alertness, you want the freshness of mind, you want the clarity that comes
Right.
with that. But you don't want like the idea to distract you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a like a firm determination and resolve, which just it it encourages the mind not to produce trivialities.
hmm
And it, yeah, hmm. Because when I look into my regular life, it is definitely marked by a sense of aimlessness.
hmm That doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like you can practice really well from that aimless perspective or from
Hmm.
that aimless state. Just that like you have to become so aimless that the only aim you have is right now, whatever happens in this moment. Because otherwise, what you probably mean is you lack structure. You don't lack
Yeah.
any like a real aim, but you because you can really be living without structure, but you can have moment to moment distractions. Like, okay, next 5 minutes I do that, then I do that, and you have like you constantly distract yourself, but
Yes.
the overall picture is lacking a direction.
Yes, that that is probably the source.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, so you can use that to your advantage if you manage to let go of even all the tiny distractions. Like,
hmm.
okay, what do I feel like now? Reading, listening to that podcast, watching that movie, entertaining yourself in various ways, wasting a lot of time. But if those are like your micro goals that you have, if you can even drop them, then you are really back to practicing meditation.
Yeah, so that actually, that I think that's definitely relevant, because what I found is that the what retreat means for me is the willingness to drop the millions of micro
Yeah.
motivations. And of course, in advance of retreat, I had to address the big ones, the things that actually needed doing in life.
hmm
So now that I'm out of retreat, um, I want to be able to take care of the big ones and drop the micro
hmm
ones. One of the
hmm
big issues for me has been the ability to recognize the difference.
Yes.
So, in any given moment of my life when I'm not on the cushion, my mind is continually wondering, what am I supposed to be doing? And therefore, even when I'm doing what I am supposed to be doing by any reasonable standard, there's still this suspicion, oh, but there's other things that might be more important. And
Mm,
it could be one of the things you've put in your to-do list, or it could be something else that you're just forgetting about.
hmm
Right? So a to-do list has helped, because at least I can say, well, clearly, I've ranked them and I've decided this is the most important. But even when doing that thing, it's like, oh, but what if there's something you forgot to write down?
Mm-hmm.
So that sense of like, what if there's something else is what plagues me at all times. And it
Yeah.
prevents me from doing even things that I feel are the right thing to be doing. And it could just be something as simple as playing with my son.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I want to be here, but what if you're really supposed to be answering that letter about the mortgage?
Mm, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see. That comes down to like really managing, I think your long-term and short-term goals. The way I did it is like I have set certain like long-term goals, and then I break them down into like daily goals. Like not every day, like I go through that exercise, but I have them like in the back of my mind, and then you can recalibrate and see if your actions that you do now serve any of those purposes or not. And you can look outwardly, you can look very busy and still have a very meditative approach to things.
Oh, I see.
Like for
Right.
me,
Yeah.
I have mentioned in some videos that most of my like progress I have not made on the cushion. But I had before I even came to regular meditation practices on the cushion, I did lots of back then it was called like all day awareness, the way
Yeah.
I found it. It's like you do certain things, like you have, for example, the thought, okay, let me do the dishes. Then for the next 10 minutes, you do the dishes. But like actually, you're practicing because you are
Right.
not distracting yourself in the mind constantly with other stories that are
Right.
running, but you are like
Right.
really actually doing the thing that you wanted
Right.
to do, like washing the
Yeah.
dishes consciously.
Yeah. That one is actually, I think, something I need practice with because, this is sort of like you're familiar with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD.
Hmm.
So people who have that, right, they have what are called intrusive thoughts. So the thought comes up, I need to wash my hands, and you might say,
Yeah.
no, actually, I know that I don't, but that thought just forces its way in.
Hmm.
And so I think similarly, what I have is something like an anxiety disorder.
Hmm.
So that even when doing the dishes and being completely confident that the next 10 minutes can be completely devoted to doing the dishes and nothing terrible will happen if I do this, there's always this vague sense that something terrible, not terrible, but I'm
Hmm.
overlooking something by doing this instead of that.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is like a very deep habit
Yeah.
that I can probably work through just by being, I don't know, maybe being more intentional about letting it rest. But all conventional habits or conventional approaches to solving that, I think, are going to be incomplete.
Hmm.
Which is why I'm doing practice to begin with. Like, is the motivation for my practice in a sense is like until the self is seen through, maybe that is not fully resolved.
Yeah, it could be. I would say it certainly plays a role, would be my intuition, but there could also be something else at play. I don't know. But I think what would help is really if that's a long habit for you, your mind has been doing that for years, then yes, it's a strong habit and training against it, not on the content level, like not saying, okay, this particular thought is not true, but
Right.
like just dropping the engagement with any thought over and over again, like
Yeah.
really
So
for probably for a good year or more, like constantly every day you'd practice that. Okay, is there are two types of thoughts. Like there are like psychic thoughts, the one you described, like that are not helpful, and then there are like productive thoughts that are actually like you have to think in order to do stuff. But those are actually very rare. Like over 90% of our thoughts are these psychic thoughts that are actually not necessary for you to live life. And
mm,
so practicing dropping them, like not producing another thought on top of them, not
right.
saying
Yeah.
okay, but
Yeah.
just disengaging over and over again,
Yeah.
discarding
Uh,
them.
Yeah. There's two issues I'm having with that. One is the ability to tell the difference between the two thoughts.
Yeah.
So what happens is a thought comes up, and now I have to engage it enough to know whether I should be dropping it or not. And that is the friction.
Yeah.
And so, and then, one of the problems I've had is insomnia. So I
Hmm.
wake up and I try to go back to sleep, but there's this sense that I'm supposed to be doing something, so I might as well, I should get out of bed now, or I should wake up early. And then the thought that keeps me awake isn't a thought in the regular sense. It's just a feeling of I that needs to be doing something. It's just a
Hmm.
feeling. I as pure awareness
Hmm.
need to be here for something. And
Hmm.
dropping engagement with that is very hard because the way I normally drop engagement is by I drop the engagement. But that's
Yeah.
exactly what keeps it alive,
Yeah. 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 That's a paradox. Yes.
right?
Um, in that sense, it's similar to actually falling asleep.
Yes,
It's disengaging from doing it all. It's like,
right. But you can't do
yeah,
that.
no, you can't. So but
That's the root
you,
issue that I'm confronting right now. That's where the
yeah,
insomnia comes from.
yeah, it's kind of like an intuitive thing. I mean, you have fallen asleep before, so it's like,
Yeah, but
yeah,
the problem
it's
is
very tricky. I know what
it
you
comes
mean. Yes.
online. I come
Yeah.
online to manage that process, and it's
Yeah. Yeah.
unconscious. I'll be
Yeah.
just everything will be fine, falling asleep, and it's like the feeling comes up. Oh, I have to fall asleep.
Yeah. 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 I know what you mean. I experienced that as well. Um,
That's where I mean that the seeing through the
yeah.
eye might alleviate that illusion of I need to come in and manage this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly does. But also, I'm thinking how I have dealt with that. In a sense, practicing meditation can help because there comes a point where um, it's a different kind of awareness where it's not like I am meditating. It's like the meditation kind of does itself. It's like you go kind of you practice the motion so much that
Right?
like yeah,
You can
okay,
disappear and
this
let
is the
it.
kind
Yeah.
of awareness I'm in, this is what I'm watching, and then oh, it's just being, that's what is, and then the eye can kind of go.
Right. Yeah. So, and that practice that you just described, I don't think it's any different from the practice that we talked about earlier.
No.
It's the same
No.
practice. Um, and so that's why it's like all of the things I'm pointing at, which are supposedly problems, just come down to sitting and letting it all go.
Yeah. And from this, what you describe, I get the sense that you have a little bit of a too tight of a focus on this goal of um, spiritual awakening, let's say.
Mm,
Because for you, it has the opposite effect of, okay, I have to reach this.
mm.
And it actually creates a stronger sense of self. That's why earlier I said, like, for me, this turning point was seeing that it's actually completely meaningless as well, because
Right.
meaning necessitates that there is someone for who anything means something. And so when that drops away, it's kind of a big part of self falling away already.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Well, it's yeah, but there's this paradox again, which is there needed to be that sense of urgency to even be willing to do retreat,
yeah,
which is what
yeah,
produced the space in which to allow that feeling to dissipate.
yeah,
S-
yeah,
s-
yeah,
And so I'm like there's an intentional sense of like maintaining that sense of urgency, only because if I don't, then my life just devolves into the nonsense that led to this habit that I'm describing.
yeah. The
During the
important
sit,
part is,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, during the sit, letting it go.
yeah. The important part is like what you said is needed. It's not necessary from a point onwards. And
Mm,
um, it's like with, I don't know, with many things that you learn throughout your life, you create, you need a certain kind of awareness to create a habit. And once you have strongly built that habit, like you don't need the eye sense. anymore
Mm,
for that part of your life.
mm,
So it's the same with meditation. Like at one point, it's like it becomes who you are. Like you
right.
do that and you sit down,
Yeah,
you
I
have
see.
your practices, you have your way of viewing things, of doing things, of disengaging with useless thought, of going through the world with a certain kind of awareness, and the practice kind of builds on itself. And
Mm,
that's where, when you feel you are at that point where, like, yeah, I don't have to worry about my practice going out of the window when I don't create that strong sense of self anymore, and you see, oh, I have been doing that for many months or years and it's
yeah, right.
staying no matter what, then you
Yeah,
can kind of play with dropping the I.
right. Yeah, unfortunately, that's something that is still a long ways. I mean, I don't know if it is or not, but it's a recent habit for me
Yeah,
to do any
yeah, yeah,
practice at
okay.
all.
Yeah.
And more generally, I think as a human, my ability or tendency to build habits appears to be very weak in comparison to most people I know. I mean, almost everyone I know is much more, just at the conventional level, much more directed, much more intentional with their life.
Hmm.
My biggest weakness is that I'm completely like I was saying, I'm aimless in the sense of being completely unintentional.
Hmm.
I'm just floating on the wind at all times.
Hmm.
And so I've not really built any. The only habit I've built is the habit of being floaty and anxious. And
Hmm.
that's not intentional either. That's just, and so like this is the first habit I'm actually working toward, like being,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's true, like in that phase, it's certainly better to keep building on that momentum rather longer than shorter, like
mm,
until you are sure, like, you have mastered certain skills around meditation, a certain habit has been established. But yeah, from what I know about you, I wouldn't be so um, critical of your own abilities to build habits. Like, I mean, you have reached like huge financial goals in your life. Like
that's true.
you had to keep to certain habits
That's
in
true.
order
And
for
exercise
that to
goals,
happen.
actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's just that, like, yeah, maybe compared to others, you have your priorities set differently, like on other things, like in other areas. So yeah, but creating habits definitely takes energy at first to build it up,
right,
and so it's the same with meditation.
right. The other, okay, so the other interesting part here is there's still this sense that, and I mean, this could be completely mistaken, but I would like my livelihood to be in line with, um, I would like it to be something meaningful and that helps others.
Hmm.
And I mean, first of all, I think I told you I've been having these memory issues and physical, there's these health issues that might make it harder to work just in general. But even if those were resolved, the question of how to orient my life, I have no sense on how to do that. That's one that, again, is very perplexing to me. Most people seem to have a pretty clear sense of how to orient themselves, even if it's not conscious. They orient themselves. I mean, most people I know, even when they were kids, were like, "Yeah, I want to be a marine biologist. I want to be this," and then it just happened. Then in college, they took the right classes to get to the right thing, and then they became the thing they wanted to be. But there's a sense of who they wanted to be and how they wanted to get there, and I have none
Yeah,
of that.
yeah, but actually, that's a disadvantage for spiritual practice if you have that very
Yes,
strong sense of what you do, what you want, what your
right.
purpose is,
But I've
because
got
then it's,
nothing. There's
yeah,
like nothing
yeah.
there. And I mean, that's fine, except, like at some level, kind of would be nice to
Yeah.
do something and feel good about doing it.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. But create meaning is actually not something that you find or that you can find for yourself or that other people find. It's also completely created. And once
Right.
you like have deconstructed many like regular sources of meaning, like they feel meaningless to you, then actually you have to create meaning purposefully. Like on you have to engage in that process and do that. And it's yeah,
Yeah, but it's like I don't even have a way to begin. I mean, that's really the root of the problem. It's like, yep, I'm in a place where everything seems meaningless. And um,
no, it doesn't. Why do we engage in this conversation? It feels kind of meaningful to you. Like
kind of, but you
spirituality.
noticed even in my email, it was like, yeah, we could do a session. It's not, it
Yeah,
wasn't like, yeah, let's do
yeah,
this thing. There, that
yeah,
that's sort of how my whole life goes. Like, yeah, we could do this thing. Like, oh, okay, now I'm doing this thing. But like
yeah,
building meaning and then feeling really like yes, and that's part of, like I was saying before, when I'm doing the dishes, and maybe the habit is while doing the dishes, that is my meaning right there, and like
yeah,
really make it meaningful and do it. But even that right now is like, oh, should I be doing dishes? Should I be doing something else?
yeah.
And I
Okay,
haven't discovered
see.
how to like make meaning.
Yeah,
And I guess I could just try
yeah,
to like, okay, if I had to make meaning, how would I do it? And then just let it,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's a kind of it's not an easy process. Like figuring out what uh, what you find meaningful and what gives purpose to your life. But it can be done. Like you have to maybe sit down for a while and like ask yourself, okay, what are the things that like I feel naturally drawn to doing, and then analyzing them. Like, what are your worldviews underlying those things? Like, how could other activities
yeah,
fit in with that? And yeah, it's a
yeah,
process that like
right,
requires some
right,
introspection and work.
yeah. In a way, the only thing that seems meaningful to me right now is um, like the conversation I started with you about Andres and QRI, like bringing to the world a model of realization that actually helps people see. I mean, the issue I have right now is the issue I have. I guess now we're talking about just strictly the conventional, but most models of awakening that I've seen out there and that rational people are willing to take seriously don't get all the way to the bottom.
Hmm.
And what I would like to bring to the world is a model which is both rational and goes all the way to the bottom.
Hmm.
So that people, and when I say people, I've got Andres in mind. He's like a prototype for this person. Can say, "Holy shit, this goes so much deeper than we realized." Because what I see happening in the world is a complete lack of meaning, purpose, direction. Um, there's no sense of the sacred.
Hmm.
That's some religious woo-woo concept, and so there's no recognition of the miracle of existence. And this is what causes people to just treat the world like shit. And so some way to help the world reorient. That's, I guess, my what gives me meaning.
Yeah, definitely something that you can pursue. I think it's great. It's a great topic to choose that you can engage with and find meaning in. One thing that I would be a bit cautious about is the amount of mental framework that is required in order for this to keep up.
Right?
Because many other things that you will do in life won't have any meaning to them if that's the framework that you apply. And so, in general, you can look for things that are actually meaningful without any framework. And that can like that can give a lot of meaning very
Can you give me an
spontaneously.
example?
It's in every moment, it's just a perception, like not going to a thought that creates, that puts your current
Yeah,
experience into a framework and
right.
only then makes the current framework sense, but
Yeah,
to just, okay, I'm riding my bike, for example. I have
yeah.
this experience of exercising, of the fresh wind in my
Yes,
face,
yes,
and I feel the exertion, I feel my body working, and this whole, like, this flow of experience, this intense happening, that doesn't need any framework.
yes, yes,
It's
yes.
just the beauty of it, and the meaning of it becomes very clear in and of itself, in the
Right,
moment. I
right.
don't have to think about it, and
Yes.
am I doing the right thing here? Am I too slow, too fast? Should I do something else? No, it's like I live. I don't think I live it, and the meaning is like, I don't even question the meaning because it's inherent. And so, you, do you get what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the way I would say it is, I can work on building the habit of um, finding the intrinsic meaning of every moment.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And paradoxically, you get that by not really looking for it, right?
right.
You
Yeah,
cannot ask yourself, okay, what's the
yeah, yeah,
meaning of
yeah.
this moment? Because then you are looking for an
Right. Yeah, a
again
framework.
a framework,
Yeah.
some
I mean, I
conceptual
can.
answer.
Yeah. So I can definitely work on just instead of looking for the meaning in this moment, deciding that it's intrinsically meaningful and dropping into the feeling of that.
Yeah, and then we are back to practice. That's practice. That's
That
being
actually,
aware of
that
the
well, that's
moment.
interesting. That doesn't. That's maybe what's missing in my practice.
Yeah, could be.
Because in my regular sits, there isn't a feeling of this moment is its own meaning.
Oh, yeah. I think that we got to a deep view that you actually create. What's the word? You, um, I'm missing the English word. You kind of instruction or in, you use that moment, this moment, as a tool for something else
Right,
and not for itself.
right,
Like you want to get something else out of this,
right.
even in the practice. Like, okay, I'm concentrating because, not because of whatever it is that, but
Yeah,
because of what I
yeah,
reach with it.
right.
That's
And it's not
so,
conscious of that. I'm not
yeah,
consciously doing that. But
yeah,
what I, but what I gather from my daily life, like, yeah, I think we may have uncovered it. In my daily life, the lack of a sense of meaning comes from my habit of overlooking the intrinsic meaning.
yes, yeah,
And the way to remedy that is simple. It's just to recognize each moment as intrinsically meaningful and not just recognize, but feel
mm,
the completion of each moment.
yeah. I think this is a kind of a habit that many successful people have. Like you have learned from a very early age that, like, yeah, you go to kindergarten and to school, and not for itself, like, yeah, to get a good job, or eventually to, to get earn lots of money. So always, for decades, it was not for this but for something else. Like this was is instilled through the educational system. You
Yeah,
learn this right now not for it but because you want to get to next year's, and so on and so on. And it's always the same, like in job as well. You don't work for the work itself, but to get the promotion, or the
right,
raise or whatever. And it's actually really hard to drop that habit.
right. Yeah, and the way it feels like to drop that habit, I mean, in my practice, instead of, because dropping doesn't, for me, bring meaning. I have to maybe be more intentional about feeling the meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, think about how often you had to train yourself in order to overlook the moment. Like as a child, you had to do many things you didn't want to do, but parents told you, no, you do that for that. And you overlooked the moment and told yourself, yeah, I'm doing that because I want.
Right.
it to fulfill a purpose, and you had to do
Right.
that over and over and over
Right.
again for many years. You
So
trained yourself. Yeah,
I need to check if my wife is picking up my son or if
yeah,
oh, okay, she's got it. Okay. I'm good.
okay.
Um,
Yeah, so again, it's about training to let go of that habit. And it's not easy because you have trained yourself so thoroughly to
right.
that view of interpreting the experience.
Yeah, so maybe I just inject this into my sits.
Yeah. Look for what, yeah, it's again tricky. Yes, you have to introduce it with like a thought and an intention, but then it's looking for what this moment can give you by itself. Again, not for any other thing than itself.
Yeah, even that I normally put into a framework, which is, yeah, I have to recall that reality is miraculous, and the ability to be here to experience the miracle is as great a thing as could ever be. I mean, that's all a framework, of course, but like,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
sometimes that's my entry point.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's certainly a good entry point. Yeah. But then this real, what I described earlier, this real engagement and spontaneously finding meaning in the experience, that's not something a framework can provide. So you will only get there through exposure to that
Hmm.
new framework, kind of where you don't apply any framework.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, looking at what's there again and again and again in meditation or outside of meditation, like it doesn't really matter. I mean, sits are very useful, but also a lot of practice time can be accumulated outside of formal meditation.
Yeah, it's so tricky. I mean, I hope I'm not going in circles here, but like, there's this like chicken and egg problem I have where it's like, okay, since I'm not good at scheduling my time or setting goals or whatever, let's say, right now I'm going to go and let's say my wife is bringing my son home. So I go inside and I want to play with him. The way I feel comfortable finding the intrinsic meaning in playing with him is by not giving in to that continual anxiety thing that I have, which says, you're actually supposed to be doing something else. That is
Mm-hmm.
like these two things are, I was going to say maybe one causes the other, but maybe they're just two aspects of the very same thing. My inability to find meaning in any moment comes from the sense that there's something else that should be happening. I mean, these may be just two different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, but I think that's what's going on for many people. And the solution is actually in daily life very simple. It's just very short, simple recognition of what you feel in your body, of what
Right,
you see, not with making it, oh my God, I have to feel happy and thankful and
right.
appreciative and
Oh,
have to see the beauty in it,
oh,
just how it is.
right. Yeah, and for me, it has to come with this trust that that's not going to make me overlook something. Like that's a subtle fear I have is that by being fully present in
Yeah,
this, I'm going to somehow neglect something else.
no. Important thoughts will always come in at the right time. Like you
That's the
won't,
thing. How will I know if they're important? That's the
yeah. For me, I mean, it's a very intuitive thing. But yeah, that's where I probably don't have the same condition as you described, like these intrusive thoughts, like maybe they all feel as similarly meaningful.
right.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, so that's why I said like there might be something else underlying that kind of sense of not being able to recognize if something is meaningful. For example, like if I go over my day and suddenly a thought pops into my mind that says, "Oh, you have forgotten to take out um, the clothes from the washing machine," then I know, okay, yeah, that's important because I shouldn't leave it there because then it's, yeah, not good for the clothing if it stays wet there, and um,
But but all of my thoughts are like that. It's like every little thing. It's like, well, you should do this random thing. Well, yeah, it's like bad if I don't, but how bad? Is it bad enough to be worth my time? And then my mind goes down this like has to evaluate each thought. It's like because there's billions of them, things you could be doing, and each one is like, yeah, it's bad, but how bad? I mean, okay, your clothes stay wet. Okay, they get mildew. So what? You can buy new clothes. Like, it's like you
yeah,
have to.
okay, yeah, but it's like, yeah, okay, you don't want to do that, and then, yeah, it's
Right, and
easier
so
to
that
just
most people
binge
have an
watch.
automatic sense of like, well, yeah, okay, my house is gonna burn down. That's probably worth
Yeah,
fixing. Or, but like this other tiny little thing, it's gonna cost me 5 cents. Probably not. And they've got a very quick,
yeah,
instinctive sense of what's important and what's not. I don't have that.
hmm. Yeah, okay. Actually, I feel a little bit, I cannot really answer anything meaningful to
Okay,
that. I don't know.
okay. But anyway, yeah, we're past time here.
Um, yeah, I will ask my wife about it. She's a psychiatrist. I'm
Oh,
sure
okay.
she has dealt with many people who had similar or even much stronger, like where they couldn't live life properly. And I will ask her what she recommends in that case, and then I will come back to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe she has some. She usually, because she is like a medical doctor, they are always quick to give some
Yeah,
prescription,
yeah.
but she may have an idea
Okay.
that could help without any drugs.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll just say in closing that I think it's connected to the anxiety problem where um, as the anxiety dissipates, that sense I think becomes more obvious. Like it's more obvious how to distinguish
Mm.
important from
Yeah.
unimportant.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yes, yes. It's kind of a thing of noise and signal, A
Right,
lot of anxiety is disrupting the signal, and so you don't
right.
get this.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's overshadowing the interpretation part of any
right.
thought. Because yeah, I know I had experiences where I had lots of anxiety, and every thought that comes into your mind during such an episode feels like it's very
Yes,
um it's a very urgent truth, and you
yes,
have to follow it. Yeah,
right.
yeah. Yeah,
And
okay,
then it's a
now
never-ending rabbit hole that leads you to another thing, and then you start evaluating all the possibilities there, and each one of those looks like it's super important. You have this tree
yeah,
of, and next thing you know, you're yeah,
yeah,
lost in a maze.
yeah.
So, but
But that may be difficult to solve with like meditation alone, at least in the short term.
mm,
But do you find like when you sit down to meditate, it helps with the anxiety?
it does, yeah. I mean, but it took retreat, a
Yeah,
few weeks of retreat to really start making a dent.
yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought. It's more of a long-term thing, like it's not helping, like it's not a quick fix.